Okay, we are live now.
Okay, thank you, Olivia.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Today is February 1st, 2023, and this is the Senate Government Operations Committee. And we are talking about S32, the bill about ranked choice voting. And we have with us Paul Burns from the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. And thank you for joining us today. Hey, Bob, could you just hit got it on the screen up there? And we can see better. It is a touch screen.
Wow.
Well
done.
Thank
4 years
you.
ago. Well,
Thank you, Paul, for being with us. You've met us all, so I'm going to just turn it over to you and ask you to take it away with your testimony.
Thanks very much, Chair Hardy, members of the committee. And for the record, my name is Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I have written testimony that we have shared with you. We also have some slides and videos that we'll get to shortly. And I'm going to read through much of this in order to keep myself on track. There's a lot to say here, and I think that will just be helpful. Obviously, feel free to ask questions as we go along. But I want to mention that VPIRG has operated as a 501c3 nonprofit in Vermont for 51 years. We also have a 501c4. We also have a 501c3 charitable nonprofit called the Vermont Public Interest Research and Education Fund. That has been in existence since 1975. For the last several years, we've been active in candidate elections, and that was for the first time we got involved in candidate elections in 2020, launching VPIRG Votes and VPIRG Votes Action Fund, a coordinated political committee and an independent expenditure committee, respectively. In my testimony today, I'll be representing VPIRG, the advocacy arm with which you are no doubt most familiar. In my earlier testimony before this committee, I noted that VPIRG has long been involved in policy matters related to democratic reform, including campaign finance, lobbying, various measures associated with making it easier for people to vote. My focus today is S32, legislation that would give voters the opportunity to rank candidates in order of preference in Vermont's next presidential primary in March of 2024. VPIRG strongly supports this legislation as the next logical pro-voter democratic reform in Vermont. There are three questions I'll attempt to address in my testimony. Why ranked choice voting? Why is the presidential primary a good place to start? And why now? So turning first to why ranked choice voting. Journalist Thom Hartmann, who lived in Vermont not so long ago, recently wrote an essay explaining the history behind why some very rich and powerful people are funding efforts to weaken our democracy in this country. I thought taking a look back was informative, so I'd like to begin by reminding us that not so very long ago, only two people sitting at this table would have been allowed to participate in a presidential election or pretty much any election in this country. Let's also remember that the 15th Amendment to the US Constitution was ratified in 1870, extending the right to vote to male African Americans. But with the end of Reconstruction, there came to follow the adoption of numerous state and local policies aimed at preventing access to the ballot, including poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and whites-only primaries. It wasn't until the passage of the Federal Voting Rights Act in 1965 that racial discrimination in voting was finally prohibited in this country. But the roots of the problem go back even further. Consider the influential British philosopher Edmund Burke, who is today considered by many to be the father of conservatism. In his time, in the 1700s, he was a member of the British Parliament and a strong opponent of the French Revolution. American revolutionary Thomas Paine visited Burke for 2 weeks in 1793 on his way to get arrested at the French Revolution. Paine, of course, supported the French Revolution and was so outraged by Burke's arguments that he wrote a book rebutting them called The Rights of Man, which some of you may have heard of. Thom Hartmann explains it this way, I'm quoting Hartmann. Burke was defending, among other things, Britain's restrictions on democracy, including limits on who could vote or run for office, and the British maximum wage. That's right, maximum wage. Burke and his contemporaries in the late 1700s believed that if working class people made too much money, they'd have enough spare time to use democratic processes to challenge the social order and collapse the British kingdom. Too much democracy, Burke believed, was a dangerous thing, deadly to nations and a violation of evolution and nature itself. Summarizing his debate with Paine about the French Revolution, Burke wrote the following, quote, "The occupation of a hairdresser or of a working tallow chandler, candle maker, cannot be a matter of honor to any person, to say nothing of a number of other more servile employments. Such descriptions of men ought not to suffer oppression from the state, but the state suffers oppression if, such as they, either individually or collectively, are permitted to rule by voting. In this, you think you are combating prejudice, but you are at war with nature," says Burke. That was why Parliament passed a law making it illegal for employers to pay people over a certain amount, so as to keep wage earners right on the edge of poverty throughout their lives. It was explicitly to avoid too much democracy and preserve the stability of the kingdom. That's the end of my Hartman piece. So what does this have to do with ranked choice voting in Vermont? Well, democracy is not one fixed thing that we can simply count on for the rest of our lives. It's not to be taken for granted. And as many has noted, democracy is not a spectator sport. It's a participatory event. And if we fail to participate, it is no longer democracy. In the past 2 years, we've seen hundreds of proposals aimed at making it harder to participate in our democracy, particularly for Black, brown, and economically disadvantaged Americans. Too many of these policies have been passed into law in other states. The US Supreme Court has struck down important elements of the Voting Rights Act, and you're all familiar with what happened on January 6th, 2021. My point is, our nation has not yet achieved its great promise. We have to keep working to improve our policies so that all voices are heard. And in this effort, we will encounter opposition from some who would prefer not to make it easier for everybody to participate. But I believe that Vermont is one of those places in the country where a strong majority of our citizens favor a healthy and robust democracy. Thanks to you and your predecessors, Vermont is one of, if not the most voter-friendly state in the country. With much effort, we have removed barriers to voting by adopting automatic and same-day voter registration. We've made voting itself more convenient with early voting, vote by mail, ballot curing, drop boxes, and more. And it must be noted that our local election officials and volunteers go to great lengths to assist voters in this process. And yet more can and must be done. Too often voters or potential voters are turned off by races that are dominated by candidates who don't seem to look or sound like them, waged in a highly partisan or negative way, and won by somebody who didn't even get a majority of support. These are some of the reasons why our voting participation rates, while high by national standards, remain far below what we would like them to be. In the 2022 midterm election in Vermont, we saw record-breaking turnout with about 292,000 Vermonters casting ballots, which was about 60% of all eligible voters in the state. In the 2020 general election that featured obviously Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, more than 367,000 Vermonters voted. Now, this was the first COVID general election and also the first to have ballots mailed automatically to all active voters in the state. It was another record-breaking year with eligible voter turnout of 72%, up from just 58% in 2016. But even in a record-breaking year like that, we still have approximately 100,000 eligible Vermont voters choosing not to cast ballots. That may be acceptable to some, and it may be the goal for others, but for us, we'd like to see participation rates much, much higher. So ranked choice voting can help, we believe, by giving voters more choices and a stronger voice in elections. By giving voters the option of ranking candidates in order of preference, you are empowering them. No longer do they have to worry that by casting a vote for their favorite candidate, they may unintentionally be helping to elect their least favorite candidate. The so-called spoiler effect that comes with voting for a candidate who is thought to be out of the running is gone. That's because if your favorite candidate is eliminated from the race, then your vote goes to your next choice. That's how ranked choice voting works. By freeing citizens up to vote for their favorite candidates, ranked choice voting provides more meaningful choices to voters, while also encouraging more diverse candidates to run and win. Fewer elections may end up being contests between two candidates that many potential voters find undesirable. In winner-take-all elections, like races for Congress or governor, for instance, RCV can reduce the aggressively partisan and highly negative campaigning. When used in primaries, it can contribute to party cohesion, as candidates who are appealing for the first and second choice votes are less likely to personally vilify their opponents. Across the board, voters say they would prefer less negative campaigning, and again, a less combative process may draw more candidates in. For instance, extensive research conducted by organizations like Fair Vote and Represent Women indicates that ranked choice voting can help give women and candidates of color a better chance to both run and win. And I know that there is a plan to bring in a representative of Represent Women, at least for testimony that the experts on this and have excellent statistics. We can provide it if needed. Ranked choice voting can also strengthen public faith in the political process itself by producing majority winners. After all, I think it's a basic tenet of democracy that the person who wins should have the support of the majority of voters. But of course, that's often not the case in elections where the plurality winner prevails. So in general, we see ranked choice voting as a highly effective next step for Vermont to take to further improve our democratic process. And in the only place where Vermont voters have recently weighed in on RCV, it's been very popular. In 2021, 64% of Burlington voters favored a proposed charter change there to use RCV for city council races moving forward. That was ultimately approved by the legislature. It is in place now. So why the presidential primary? I spoke earlier of RCV addressing the spoiler problem in elections. But in the case of presidential primaries, we're concerned not only about the spoiler effect, but also the problem of wasted votes and lost opportunities. So can we go to, for instance, the 2016 presidential primary, which you see some represented in the pie chart here. This was, remember, a fairly wide open contest at the start. And recall that in the GOP primary in Vermont, all candidates who win at least 20% of the vote receive a proportional share of the delegates. But if one candidate gets over 50% of the votes cast, that person gets all of the delegates in the Republican primary. In Vermont's primary, Donald Trump won 32.5% of the vote and finished, and the second place finisher, John Kasich, won 30.2%. Now, those two together represent the large blue, the majority of the pie chart there. They each got 8 delegates because their vote totals were so close. But, and this is important, 2,266 Vermonters, which is the orange slice there, voted for candidates like Jeb Bush, Rand Paul, Chris Christie, and Carly Fiorina, who ultimately dropped out before the Vermont primary even took place. These votes were essentially wasted on candidates who finished not just out of the running, but literally they had dropped out of the race before our primary came about. Approximately 20,000 more voters in the GOP primary cast their ballots for people like Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, and the third place finisher in the race, Marco Rubio. Rubio had 19.2% of that vote. Those candidates together are represented by the gray slice. If ranked choice voting had been in place for the presidential primary in 2016 and used by the Republican Party, then the votes of more than 2,000 Vermonters would not have been lost to candidates who had already dropped out. And as the second choices of voters were identified as candidates with the fewest votes were eliminated, it's quite possible, even likely, that Rubio, for instance, would have reached that 20% threshold and qualified for delegates, as he was just below at 19.2%. Now, turning to the Democratic presidential primary in 2020, the last obviously contested primary for the Dems, we see also how voters would have benefited from ranked choice voting. Remember, in the Democratic primary, delegates are distributed proportionally to all candidates who get at least 15% of the vote. Now, in 2020, hometown candidate, Bernie Sanders, was by far the top vote getter with about 51% of the vote. Joe Biden was the only other candidate to receive delegates, as he won about 22% of the vote. And that's the large blue portion of the pie. But in this contest, nearly 7,000 Vermonters, 6,867 to be exact, voted for candidates who ended up withdrawing from the race before the primary took place. Again, nearly 7,000 in that contest. Candidates who had withdrawn but still received over 500 votes included Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Andrew Yang. An additional 36,000 votes were cast for Democratic candidates who failed to meet that 15% threshold, including Elizabeth Warren at 12.5% and Michael Bloomberg at 9.4%. Those candidates are represented in the gray slice. If RCV had been available to voters in this race, the 7,000 votes would not have been wasted, and thousands more would have been redistributed as second choice ballots were counted when low-ranking candidates were eliminated. Elizabeth Warren, at least, would have had a very good shot at receiving delegates in that race. More importantly, RCV would empower voters and encourage greater participation. And those who cast a ballot early would not have to fear throwing it away if their top choice dropped out. With ranked choice voting, every vote matters. Why now? Why should we be doing this now? Well, in August of 2022, the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law School wrote, quote, "Over the past 18 months, there has been an unprecedented wave of anti-voter legislation introduced and passed in this country. In 2021, at least one bill with a provision restricting access to voting was introduced in the legislature of every state except Vermont. By early May of this year, meaning last, nearly 400 restrictive bills have been introduced in legislatures nationwide," end quote. The situation has not improved greatly since then. States like Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Texas and others are considering laws or constitutional changes this year that could further suppress voting. The Supreme Court is seriously considering the merits of a South Carolina law challenging the very foundation of the way we conduct federal elections in this country. The so-called independent state legislatures theory would enable bodies to gerrymander districts and even rig electoral rules for partisan advantage, with no check by clerks, governors, or redistricting commissions, or courts, governors, or redistricting commissions. That case is now in the hands of the US Supreme Court, as I'm sure you know. A national survey released just over a month ago found that 8 out of 10 Americans believe that the US faces a threat to democracy. A major contributor to that belief is the fact that 2 years ago, supporters of then President Donald Trump sought to overturn his election defeat in a violent attack at the US Capitol. Mr. Trump is running again, still denying the legitimacy of the 2020 election. Also in Washington, we saw legislation fail last year that would have reined in partisan gerrymandering, reduced the influence of money, expanded voting rights, and enhanced security of elections. And the divided Congress this year all but ensures that no further progress will be made in this area. Meanwhile, Russia, China, and other authoritarian regimes are fomenting division here and celebrating every challenge to our form of government. Why do we need to do this now? Well, first, because I think we can do better by our own citizens. If history is a guide, thousands of Vermonters will vote next year in the presidential primary contest for candidates who drop out before the primary is held. Thousands more will see their chosen candidate's founder with no chance of winning delegates here. Let's preserve their voice in this process by giving them a better choice at the polls. And second, it's also true that our democracy is fragile. It's not safe. We need to promote civil discourse and bring more voices in. This is not a spectator sport, as we said before. We must do more to invigorate our democracy now. If you're looking for a better place to start, you won't find it. The states have to lead now, and I don't think there is a state better positioned to do so than Vermont. Will everyone be on board from the start? No. And honestly, that's been the case with every reform that Vermont has passed over the course of the last 20 years since I've been working on this. But Vermonters generally have embraced these reforms that have together made Vermont a more voter-friendly state. We can do this. You have heard and will hear from people and organizations who have hands-on experience about how RCV works elsewhere. Remember, millions of people around the world use RCV and have done so for many years. Scores of municipalities in the United States use it. And as you've heard, a handful of states, red and blue, has successfully used ranked choice voting in the presidential primary process, including Kansas, Hawaii, Alaska, Wyoming, Nevada, and Maine in 2024 is already going to plan to use it. In Vermont, you've heard testimony from the Burlington City Clerk about how ranked choice voting has successfully been reintroduced to voters there in the December special election, and it will be used citywide in the upcoming town meeting day. I'd like to conclude then by reviewing some of the nonpartisan public education work my organization has done to help voters get comfortable with ranked choice voting. Some of this has been statewide, much of it has been focused on Burlington, which is now using ranked choice voting again. Our plan would be to collaborate with many others to do much more of this kind of work leading up to the next presidential primary if this legislation is passed. We also have two short clips highlighting the reaction of Burlington voters to this method of voting in the December special election. So let me move to the screen if we can. Okay, so this is looking at a kind of a promotional piece. Last summer, before primary day, VPIRG held a ranked choice voting mock primary for US House and Senate primaries. It was advertised to our members through email, social media, and even picked up by local media outlets like WCAX and the Rutland Herald. It gave voters a chance to see how ranked choice voting works, looking at real candidates in a real race. Remember, this race initially, the House race initially included Senator Keisha Brown Hinsdale, who dropped out before that primary was held, in part in order to avoid playing the role of spoiler in that race. Those are her words, I'm paraphrasing. Senator Rahm Hinsdale is, of course, another lead sponsor of this legislation. Let's go to the next. So in 2021, Burlington was considering amending its charter to apply ranked choice voting, to use ranked choice voting in the city council races. We've already referenced that. I just wanted to note here that there was a so-called Yes on 4 campaign. The ballot question was number 4 on the ballot in Burlington. And as you can see, we had bipartisan co-chairs of the campaign to promote this effort. Former Governor Howard Dean, Democrat, and current city councilor Zariah Hightower, Progressive. Next, there's
folks, this is Sinead with VPIRG with some exciting news. Burlington voters in the East District will get to use ranked choice voting for the first time since voters passed the charter on December 6th for a special election for City Council. Unfamiliar with ranked choice voting? Click the link below or keep watching.
With ranked choice voting, voters rank candidates in order of their preference, first, second, third, and so on. If your vote can't help your top choice win, it counts towards your next choice instead. Here's how it works. If one candidate gets 50% or more of everyone's first choice votes, that candidate wins and the election is over. However, if no one gets at least 50%, the candidate with the fewest first choice votes is eliminated, and their supporters' votes will count towards their second choice. This process continues until someone gets a majority of the vote. Ranked choice voting gives voters more voice, more choice, and a stronger democracy. Learn more about ranked choice voting and try it out for yourself with Ben & Jerry's flavors at betterballotvermont.org/BTV2022.
Ben & Jerry's Flavors gives us a great opportunity to just have people participate, have a little fun doing it.
We need to do a taste test.
I know, we need cupcakes.
Make that happen, senators. In the next two slides are the front and back of literature that we use going door to door canvassing in the East District of Burlington in advance of the special election in December. We left literature with folks who are not familiar with ranked choice. And as you can see, that included an image of the December 6th ballot and some frequently asked questions as well, as you can see here. So again, the idea is in a nonpartisan way to simply be trying to get information into the hands of folks who may be unfamiliar with the ranked choice voting process. Let's go to the next. This is an image of a mock ranked choice voting ballot we used, again, with Ben and Jerry's flavors on the website, Better Ballot Burlington, betterballotvermont.org. We did this as part of a webinar that featured partners, including Jerry Greenfield of Ben and Jerry's, and a representative of the League of Women Voters from Maine. Maine has obviously been successfully using ranked choice voting for some years. And we had others on this webinar, invited particularly our Burlington members and supporters to tune into that and then to participate in this process. Let's go to the next. Next two slides are from a mailer that we will be sending to all residents of Burlington. Every single valid residential address in Burlington will receive this mailer as just about the time when they should receive their ballots for town meeting day there. That should be on or about February 15th. And again, it's just going through some of the basics of how this works. And if this mailer arrives at their door at about the same time as the ballot, we just are hoping that it's one more way that they can learn a little bit more about this process. You heard that the clerk in the city of Burlington had not been doing a great deal to help educate voters, so we are happy to help engage in that process just to make sure that voters have a place to turn. It's not that the city is doing nothing, but we wanted to augment the modest bit that they are doing for this. And before you go to the next, I will just set it up to say there are two short videos following focusing on voter reactions to ranked choice voting in that special election in Burlington in December. My colleague Sam here, who you will see in a moment, conducted short interviews with some of the folks who were leaving the polling place. And then we have a story from WCAX that we will go to next, which was their coverage of this election. And then I am done and happy to answer questions. So let's go to the first video, please. Sinead.
Loading.
Okay. Sorry, I should have had you do it.
I think if depending on the volume, I think you have the plus on your side.
I've tried it over here too.
I think it did get a
Did it
little
go
bit loud.
higher?
Yeah, but this is, I think, also the key too.
Still loading.
It's still loading. We can try the WCAX video.
It's not me. You think that would be faster?
City Council race decided by ranked choice voting. The system is back in Burlington for the first time in more than a decade, but is it a winner?
Catherine Huntley was at the polls today for the special election to get reaction to that voting system. Joins us now in the studio. Catherine, what did you hear from people?
Well, for the most part, people I spoke to said it was easy to figure out just how to vote by the system. Some even say they hope it's expanded to other Burlington elections.
I think it makes more sense. I think you feel like the person who the most people want really gets in.
Voters casting their choices today for the East District Councilor who covers wards 1 and 8 in the community. Many said they took advantage of the voting method by ranking all 3 candidates. In ranked choice, if the person who gets the highest number of votes doesn't achieve 50%, the challenger with the least votes is automatically out. And then people's second place votes are counted in the next round.
I think it captures sort of the sentiments of a voter better. You really don't know if somebody doesn't get enough votes. You don't know what the voter was really looking for in a candidate, and this captures that.
Burlington previously had ranked choice for mayoral elections in the mid-2000s. However, it was repealed after a mayoral election where the person who received the most votes in the first round didn't ultimately win.
The candidates on the left split the number 1 votes, but as people started ranking 2 and 3, then those votes weren't split anymore, and the left emerged victorious with Mayor Bob Kiss. So it worked as it was intended to work.
Bert Johnson, a Middlebury political science professor, says it can be confusing for people voting for the first time using this method. Burlington also had plenty of materials to help people understand at the polls today.
I found it to be pretty straightforward. I thought they did a good job explaining it.
Ultimately, others in support say they hope this is used in mayoral elections. That could be headed to the ballot in March.
It also allows for voting to be a less ugly and partisan thing in terms of the way the campaigns are run. There's an incentive to be more civil in the campaign because you might want to be someone's second choice.
Now, others I spoke to who did not want to go on camera today said that while ranked choice voting takes away some barriers to running for office, the way Burlington's district map is set up still creates issues of expensive campaigns for those who wish to vie for city council. Live in the studio, Catherine Huntley, Channel 3 News.
That's great. And I don't know whether Sam is loaded.
It has
Okay,
not.
that's fine. Well, why don't we skip that and we can make it available as a link if the members of the committee are interested in that. But it was essentially another 10 or so brief interviews with those similar reactions to what you saw there.
And it's on your
slides.
so we
Yeah.
can have a chance to see you, Sam.
That's great. Well, so with that, I would say thank you very much for the opportunity to provide some testimony today. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Senator Clarkson.
So one of the pluses of ranked choice voting is that it's supposed to be less partisan, build civility. Why then does it, I mean, I'm just curious, it still seems to be divided support across the country. And have you, I mean, in the other states that have adopted ranked choice voting in part, it's still, I mean, the result may be less divisive, but why do we still have so much Republican opposition to it?
I don't know exactly, because you've seen it adopted in states that we would consider to be more Republican leaning. I believe you will hear testimony from a elections administrator from the state of Utah, for instance, a Republican, who can address some of these points. There have been excellent pieces written by more conservative leaning organizations that support this. This is not about supporting a party or cause or political bent. It is merely a method of voting. And as you saw, it's used in southern states and the military side of things. I honestly don't know. It does not, there's nothing about ranked choice voting that elevates a particular person or particular party in that way. So I'm not sure. Voting reform is sometimes thought of as a more progressive thing, and then perhaps it just gets painted with that brush. There is nothing about ranked choice voting that is, again, a particular benefit to one party or another.
Right. It's my sense.
Senator White?
Thank you, Chair Hardy. So I had a question that I've asked one previous witness around, is there any known incentive or behavior change that people make with choosing if they're going to run in a primary when there's ranked choice voting? Like, would someone choose to not be in a primary or choose to be in a primary based on if ranked choice voting is the main way of deciding that? Trying to think through, does this give any advantage to not necessarily a political party, but the lack of a political party?
As opposed to an independent candidate,
Yeah, exactly.
are you saying? There are, I don't know, Senator, because there are certainly all sorts of advantages still in the way we run our elections. Representatives of major political parties still have great advantages over independent candidates generally, and there are lots of reasons that I think are probably apparent to many of us. It doesn't mean that independents cannot win, clearly, but they don't have all of that support and the mailing list and typically the financial support that may come from being the representative of a major political party. It allows you, it may allow an independent candidate to say, maybe voters will look at my candidacy as less of a lark and be more willing to express support for any of any candidates in the race, because they don't have something, the voters don't have something to lose so much in doing so. It doesn't necessarily make that person a winner in the election, of course, but it does intentionally, I think, open the process up to more diverse candidates. I mean, by its nature, we wouldn't be talking about ranked choice voting if we believe there should only be two parties, two candidates representing a Republican or a Democrat. And in Vermont, of course, we've got the third major party as a progressive, so we often have, in many places, 3 or more candidates. And in that case, I think that tends to provide a more robust debate and election, and maybe allows voters to see candidates who, again, look and sound more like them and are representing the issues that they care more about. think that's a healthy thing for the democracy. That's the only thing I can think about why it might allow somebody to run. But there's generally, if you're choosing, gosh, I think most political analysts would say if you could be the representative of a major political party in a general election day race, you're likely better off than an independent, even with ranked choice voting.
So one of the concerns that we've had raised by our clerks in particular is potential increase of cost and volunteer time, and just like generally this change could make their jobs more difficult. And I am very respectful towards our clerks because I do think they have some of the most difficult jobs. I'm wondering if you, as you have proposed this, if you've met clerks who are in favor of this now, like as you've talked to folks in other states, we have a very special way that we run our democracy here. I don't want us to pit some of the benefits of this against real logistical concerns that the people implementing our elections have. So I don't know if you've followed that nationally, if there's been.
Oh, yes, and I think you'll hear from some election administrators from other places that have used this process. And I think let's look at each one of those questions that are being raised, and many of them are about the mechanics of the process. Look, we're not the first state to try this, and many, well, not many, but a number of others have. Many places have used it for municipal, but again, other states, including Maine, not far away. Maine is also 3 times the size of Vermont. So when you're thinking about logistics of moving things, or Alaska, which is 69 times the size of Vermont. So they got to move ballots, and they got a lot of logistical things to consider in these large, rural, relatively low population states. And so if they can do it, I'm quite confident. Like the mechanic, we could make this happen here. It doesn't mean that any of those questions are illegitimate. We should run them to ground, and go through this. I think having and we are helping to facilitate a conversation between clerks in Vermont and clerks in Maine on Friday this week, and have opened that up to any clerks in Vermont who are interested in participating in that process and dialogue. And we will do it again as many times as they want, and with as many representatives from states who have done this and have expertise. I mean, let's figure out what all the questions are and answer them. And I'm quite confident we have those answers. But change is always hard, and I do think I have been around this block on other reforms, and sometimes we don't have the full support, of clerks or others moving forward. In the end, I feel like it is possible to do this, and you have to look at what are the benefits that we are giving to Vermont voters and to the health of our democracy by moving forward with this, and try to balance those interests and perspectives. And I'm really confident that we can make that happen. And I believe you and the clerks will hear more testimony from folks who really have that on the ground expertise.
Thank you. There are other questions for Paul? Senator Vigilowski.
Thank you. I've asked this question of a couple of people, and I am hoping you might have the answer. But how do Maine and Alaska handle their hand count towns? Or does Alaska even have hand count towns? Because I know Maine does.
I know some of that, but may I defer to my colleague? You feel comfortable answering this?
Sure. You want to just come up and introduce yourself? So sorry, Paul. It's okay.
Hi all. My name is Sam McGinty. For the record, I work with Paul and Sinead here at the Vermont Public Interest Research Group as their democracy advocate. I can't speak in full to Alaska, but for Maine in particular, they also have a number of hand count towns, which can be logistically difficult, tallying ballots. And while I think that Maine is better suited to answer all of these questions, from my understanding, is they're only responsible for counting and reporting on election night the first round results. So in essence, really no different than what they do on election night now, or in a plurality election where they're just counting who got the most first place votes. After that, there is a very succinct or very tight chain of custody where those ballots are collected and sent and centralized in Maine's capital. And at that point, the tabulation occurs under the Secretary of State's observation. So in essence, their day-to-day is answering voters' questions, reporting on those first round results. And then from there forward, a courier service actually comes and collects those ballots. So they're not actually responsible for transferring the ballots to Augusta either.
As a quick follow-up, does Maine do centralized ballot counting for everything? So everything has to go to Augusta anyways?
In the event that a runoff is needed, so if one candidate gets a majority outright, the Secretary of State says, great, election's done. If no majority is determined outright, then the Secretary of State triggers this collection of ballots.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And I think we will try to hear directly from Maine officials to get this question more fully answered. But yeah, thank you for, it's a good start. Senator Watson, did you have a question?
I do, and it's still sort of forming in my brain, so I apologize for this. It might come out still kind of nebulous. The questions that I have, I think, are relatively technical, and so just thinking about like the different ways that it can show up and the percentages and all of this, are there different types of, I mean, we have two different types of ranked choice voting sort of built into this bill right now. Are there other types of ranked choice voting, and are there reasons why we should not be doing those other types? Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
So the short answer is yes, there are multiple types of a ranked ballot. However, this form of ranked choice voting is really the only one that's used across the country and across the world. There are other methods called Borda count, for example, which gives a numeric score to a ranking, and that's used in MVP voting for Major League Baseball. So we use it in the country, but not necessarily for how we elect candidates.
Just to follow up on that, in S32 there are two different types, mostly because of the two parties use different ways of calculating their ballot or their I'm blanking on the delegates. But it's still, from the perspective of a voter, the ballot looks the same whether you're voting in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary. It's still like, here are the candidates and you rank them. So I think it is a little bit important to understand that from a voter's perspective, they see the same thing. It's not like they're two different types of ballots.
That's right. Yeah, they would, in essence, they would look identical.
Yeah.
You would just be cutting or stopping that runoff election depending on what that threshold is determined by the party.
Right, and that's the same as it is under current law. There are two different methodologies that the parties use. So I just want to make sure everybody remembers that, because I had to stop myself and be like, wait. All right, do you have anything else to add, Sam? Okay. Do you have anything else to add, Paul?
I was just going to add one
Yeah, go ahead.
last thing on that matter. So that is not two different kinds of ranked choice voting. It is only up to the parties there, whether it's a 20% or a 15% threshold. The method of ranked choice voting is the same in that case. Also remember that this bill would not require the parties to do this. The Democratic Party has been in other places more willing to do this. If the Vermont Republican Party, even after this law was passed, was unwilling or uninterested to do this, there's nothing in this law that would force them to use it. They could just look at who won the most first place votes and do things as they always have in that way. That's not my preference, but I do think it's important that you all understand how that process could work. For instance.
It's an opt-in.
It's an opt-in for the party to decide. They get to make that decision of how it works. I mean, you could, well, anyway, yes, that's the way this bill is written, that they get to decide.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll hear more from you, and would love to get more information after you meet with the clerks and hear how that goes. Obviously, we'll talk with the clerks as well.
Sure.
So Olivia, is our next witness on?
I'm right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you in the corner.
Peering over everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being with us.
Yes,
And this is your first time with us.
It
yes.
is,
So we'll
yes.
introduce ourselves and then you can introduce yourself and take it away. And thank you for your patience. I know we're running a little bit behind.
Only his first time as witness, but we've had the pleasure.
I
of
was here
seeing-
last week. Yes.
Okay. So I'm Ruth Hardy from the Addison District.
Steve Chittenden, Central.
Rebecca White, Windsor.
Bob Norris, Franklin County.
And Watson, Washington County.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
And our committee assistant is with us virtually today. So
Nice to meet you.
go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in strong support of S32, a bill that will help promote a healthy democracy by giving voters more choice and more of a voice. For the record, my name is Justin Marsh. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Political Outreach Director at Vermont Conservation Voters, or VCV. For those not familiar with VCV, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization whose vision is for a bright future for Vermont. It includes working to advance and defend policies that protect the environment and promote health while advancing social, economic, and racial justice and strengthening our democracy. We produce an annual Vermont Environmental Common Agenda, which Senator Kohofsky has with her, and it highlights the environmental community's top legislative priorities each year, and S32 was identified as one of our top priorities this year. We prioritize this legislation because we believe that a healthy environment relies on a healthy democracy. Our current political system, exacerbated by federal action like the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, allows money and special interests to have undue influence. The current system allows candidates to win with less than a majority of support, and it can shut out independent voices. By passing S32, we can give voters more choices and ensure we elect candidates supported by a majority of voters. VCV works to recruit and train candidates who share our vision and values. We often hear people wrestle with whether they should run or not, and often feel dissuaded from bringing a new choice onto the ballot. Ranked choice voting will allow more diverse candidates to run without the fear that they'll support a candidate with a similar, pull support from a candidate with similar values. VCV appreciates that this bill only includes presidential primaries, but I do want to take a moment just to give a local and personal perspective. So in 2012, in my home district of Lamoille 3, there was a vacancy for state representative, and I was active and interested in local politics and encouraged to run. I ran as an independent with two other candidates. None of us received a majority of the votes on election day. Bernie Jeskowitz won with 37% of the vote, while the Democrat and myself split the more progressive vote. And I know that we had a lot of the same supporters and a lot of the same endorsements as well. Our combined votes equaled 63%. And I've often heard on the campaign trail, I wish I could vote for all of you. Well, circumstantial, of course, in the next contested race in my district, which was 2018, the Democrat representative, Lucy Rogers, won with 59%. And then in 2022, most recently, the Democrat Representative Lucy Boyden won with 70%. No other independent or third-party candidate has sought the candidacy since I ran. Had ranked choice voting occurred, the end results may have differed, and more voters could have felt heard and represented. By allowing voters to rank their candidates in order of preference, people can support the candidates they prefer without feeling compelled to do a strategic voting, worrying about the candidate they think is most likely to win. In our candidate trainings and recruitment, we also hear from candidates who feel discouraged from running due to how negative campaigns can get. This can be particularly true for women and for candidates of color. Ranked choice voting helps to discourage highly negative campaigning, since candidates feel the need to appeal to voters as a possible second choice. With politics getting more and more polarized, we think this would be a step in the right direction. We also believe a healthy democracy engages as many voters as possible. We are strong supporters of many of the reforms implemented in recent years, including same-day and automatic voter registration and universal vote by mail. Adopting ranked choice voting in presidential primaries will be another step in a positive direction by ensuring all voters' voices will count, which can become an issue when a candidate has pulled out of the race, as I mentioned. VCV has spent a lot of time and effort on this in partnership with the Secretary of State's office and more than a dozen diverse organizations, including Disability Rights Vermont, the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, the ACLU of Vermont, and many others to educate voters on vote by mail, and we stand ready to collaborate with our partners to educate Vermont voters on how to successfully participate in ranked choice voting for the presidential primaries in 2024. We can learn the lessons from the other states and communities who have already successfully implemented RCV. In conclusion, at a time when democracy is under attack in so many states, we're excited that Vermont is taking up S32, which will help ensure more voters' voices are heard and encourage more diverse candidates to run and foster more positive elections. We hope the committee moves this policy forward, and we look forward to continuing this work together. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Justin. Does anyone have any questions? So just one, first of all, I think your testimony is on our website. Yeah.
It is, and I submitted it to Olivia like 10 minutes before, but I have.
Yeah, it's not on for today, but I'm sure. Oh, if you do hard copies, that would be great. Some of us love hard copies.
Oh, good. Olivia just said it is on the website. Yes.
Yes. It's just
excellent. Maybe refresh your screen. I just want to clarify, you said at the end that your organization, Vermont Conservation Voters, would be happy to be involved in the voter education. And what do you think that might look like?
For Vote by Mail, we published videos and we did some paid campaigns on social media and websites with a landing page on our website that educated voters on how to receive the ballot and what to do with it from there.
Mm-hmm. So you did that for the vote by mail, and that's the kind of thing you would be expecting to do if this bill were to pass as well. Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin.
Okay, and now we have Betty Keller, and Betty is not in the room. Okay, is Betty on Zoom?
Yes, but she also said that she was in the lobby.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Olivia.
Oh, she might just be outside.
Oh, is she like here physically in the State House, but just on Zoom?
Yes.
Well, you're welcome to come in. I'm gonna go grab.
Senator White's gonna go search her out.
Okay, she emailed me that she was in the lobby, so.
Since October.
Yes.
There weren't any
Oh, I mean, for those of us who've been, I was on the board of the NRC, like, before the building there, in renovated, the old building.
Yeah.
So, high installation.
So where's the plug? If you want to just sit there and just log out of this, so you're not both physically here and virtually here.
Does that make sense?
Slides to share.
Well, I can turn off my sound.
I think to share slides.
Slides to share. Okay, I see. Yeah, let's make sure the sound is turned off. And you can share.
And my sound is on.
Yeah, it's warmer.
It's not very warm in here.
It's not warm in here. Are you guys cold?
Yes.
Oh, we don't have control of
It's
that.
on warm.
It is on warm.
It's on warm.
It's really on warm
Yeah.
today. Okay.
Good.
Is it,
Emma, you're on it.
Do people want the lights on, or is it okay?
No, it's
They're
not.
They're okay. Nice. All right. It's lovely for Senator Clarkson. We'll leave them on. Okay. Take your time, Betty. We're just kind of embracing the chaos of our room.
Right, I thought you. So your 2 o'clock first thing already.
I do that.
Yes.
Because somebody was already here at 3 up, so I wasn't sure what was happening.
Nope, I was in and out.
Okay.
Quick and easy. You're supposed to.
Thanks, Justin.
Oh, we're here. I'm just Instagram.
Okay.
You're just Instagram? Is that what you just said?
Should I just stick around? I'm just gonna stick around.
Instagram if you want me to.
Right now. Come on, Instagram Live.
Less is more on that front.
All right, you ready?
I am.
Okay, excellent. So thank you for joining us. And if you're ready and you want to share your slides, so
That won't be until later.
Oh,
I have
until
them,
later,
I want to talk a little bit first, yeah.
Okay, excellent. You've been in the room when we've introduced ourselves, right? So you know who we all are. So why don't you then just introduce yourself and then tell us what you'd like us to know.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm not sure which way is the best way to do this. So
Good afternoon, Senators. I am Betty Keller from St. Johnsbury, and I thank you for inviting the League of Women Voters of Vermont to share our perspective on S32. In 1999, the League of Women Voters of Vermont worked with the state, with the legislative committee on a study on ranked choice voting and determined that it would support ranked choice voting for statewide offices. And then a League of Women Voters study group here in Vermont reassessed alternative voting methods between 2017 and 19. So we looked at the data in the meantime, including score voting, approval voting, ranked choice voting, and the Condorcet method. So we looked over all those. And in 2019, we reaffirmed our support for ranked choice voting for statewide elections. We also voted to support election methods at every level of government that encourage participation, are verifiable and auditable, and enhance representation of all voters. And we strongly felt that ranked choice voting was the one that did the best job. In the spring of 2019, we supported the bill for officials for statewide offices to be selected by ranked choice voting, with the expectation that it was an educational effort that would then be passed the following year, we were hoping. And everybody knows what happened in the spring of 2020, and any efforts for ranked choice voting went out the window. The League then supported Burlington's efforts to change its charter in 2022. And today we're supporting S32, which proposes to require the use of ranked choice voting for the presidential primary elections for each major party. Chris Hughes was here from Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center and explained some of the anticipated benefits of ranked choice voting in more typical elections. And I'm happy to talk about that in more detail later if you wish. And I've given on the documents I sent in advance, I have a couple of copies here in paper. I've given some references that you could look at for some of the questions you had for him. I got some of those references from him. But this bill, S32, is uniquely different from the other ranked choice voting bills that we've supported in the past. The primary reason the League of Women Voters of Vermont supports ranked choice voting is because generally it provides, at the end of all the tallying, a winner who has the support of the majority of voters, without fear of spoilers splitting the votes of constituents with similar preferences. But the presidential primary differs not only because the candidate, the winner is only a candidate. They don't actually win an election, so that's one major difference. And the other is that there's not necessarily a single winner because of the way they divide the delegates up. The candidates in the state presidential primary receives delegates allotted based on their party rules, with each party setting its own rules. So this reason doesn't even apply. Our primary reason doesn't even apply. But there are two separate and crucial reasons to support ranked choice voting that are specific to the presidential primary. And the first one I'm quite sure that Chris mentioned and you all have mentioned is that voters could mail in their ballots and have the candidate they preferred withdraw before actual election day. And in that case, they wasted their vote. They don't have any say in who the candidate will be representing them. As you've heard also, 6 southern states have used ranked choice voting for their military and overseas voters in a variety of elections. These are states that require a majority to win some of their elections. So they had to have runoffs if there was no majority. We don't do those here, so some people are less familiar with that. Those states that did not want to change their constitutions to delay the runoff decided, because the ballots would take so long to come back, that they decided to go ahead with the ranked choice voting for those voters. Some of them were forced by the Supreme Court to go to ranked choice voting because they had to have equal access to the vote for all voters. Now in Vermont in 2018, there was a bill here to allow military and overseas voters to vote in presidential primaries by ranked choice voting. But the Secretary of State at the time noted that that would give greater access to voting than to those folks in the general public voting by mail-in ballot, because we have a pretty generous mail-in ballot policy. So that also would have been illegal, would have gone to the Supreme Court if somebody wanted to press that. This year, this bill doesn't actually have that problem. The bill this year provides the benefits of ranked choice voters to all voters, whether they're military or overseas, out-of-state college students, somebody in Florida for a couple of months in the wintertime, busy people who work full-time and want to vote at a more convenient time, but also for same-day in-person voters. They also have that benefit. About this, the second benefit is about the delegates. So that if you vote for a person who doesn't get to the threshold to get any delegates, then you've just lost your choice, your chance of representation. But in addition to those candidates who withdrew, candidates who are eliminated because of having too few votes to get up to the threshold, the ballot will be looked at and go to the next viable candidate, the next candidates that hasn't withdrawn and is still in the running, and your vote will go to them. That's what I have my slides for. If that would be helpful for people to look at a sample, or if you have already like exhausted this and don't want to be on that.
Which one do you want us to
look at?
You can put your slides up if you want. I mean, we've seen it before, but it always helps to see it again. You know, repetition is helpful.
Essential, so.
We look at a lot of bills, so.
But you want us to look at the second of your, the ranked choice voting in presidential primaries, that was the one you want us to pull up?
Right, so I will. Now, how do I speed my other screen to be able to pull up?
No, I have.
So once I put it in slideshow.
Yeah.
Are
Okay,
you
so I think I have
sharing
to-
your screen?
Yeah, I'll have to put it here first, find the Zoom.
You got it.
Share and then go to slide presentation.
You are spot on.
Okay, thank you.
You're old hat at this.
Oh,
Here you go.
yeah, now I'll click and start. Okay, so this is the first screen. So these are the two benefits I just described. And this is going to help us walk through it. So I took off the names, but this
Hold
is.
on, do you want to,
You
actually
wanna-
start your slideshow? so we
Yeah,
can
you
see the
may
whole
have
slide.
to change presenter view, so
So-
inside, so click those little three dots. Should give you, use present.
Okay, great. Thank
Is
you.
it, did it change?
So.
I need to stop sharing and then restart it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna go here, and this is the. I'm gonna escape here, and let's see if that gives me a screen that I can tell. Okay, so here's the slideshow, there's where the play from start's gonna be. Actually, play from current slide will be fine, except that I need to first be in Zoom.
Yeah, so I would just do it as, yeah, you would just escape and you have to go back. So you're
So
gonna
it's still,
delete,
yeah.
yeah.
So when
So,
I'm here, here's the Zoom.
mhm.
Here's
So
the
hit shared screen,
screen.
and then you're gonna hit,
I hit this.
you
But I
could
wanna
just
choose
do
this
desk, so just do desktop. So hit your desktop right there. And share that, and then you're sharing it, you hit play from start right there. And now it should show when it loads. Did you hit the play from start?
I did.
After she's done.
Okay,
Oh, good,
um,
excellent, okay.
So here we are. So this is a real life situation that happened. I took off the candidate's name, so it's A through J.
Oh, too bad.
And you can see that F, G, H, I, and J all withdrew. So everybody who voted for those people would not have any say in who was going to get delegates to go to the national convention. So you can see here which ones have withdrawn. So it's not a lot of votes, but still, there's a couple thousand people who took the time to put some thought into it and everything. So on this one, you can see in addition, the candidate E only had 4.15. Now, sometimes the software will do things very sequentially, so that first you take out the withdrawn candidates, then you look at the last candidate and you transfer the votes to the next choices, and et cetera. But then sometimes you can instead program it so that it looks at every mathematically viable candidate. And if you see the person only has 4% of the vote, and even if every single person that withdrew and every write-in candidate, every other ballot that was for anybody else lower than them on the ranking, all went to candidate E, they still wouldn't get to 20%. Okay, and I mean D wouldn't either, but at least you know for sure that the E candidate would. So if you thought that, well, maybe all of those votes all went to D, then they still would only have 4.36, so they're not going to work out. But then where do those votes go? We still don't know. So if you were to say that they went, some went to A, more went to B, and quite a few went to C, then the delegates would be distributed to be 5, 7, and 4 rather than 8 and 8. So when you get to the national convention, you can see that if that were happening differently across the country, that would make a big difference. But at least the people who wanted C more than they wanted A or B still had a voice to still have their candidate be in the running. So does that make sense? Right. So I have another example. Or did you have an example?
Center way.
Well, thank you, Chair Hardy. So one of the things that is just dawning on me, which is, I feel like I thought I understood the benefits of ranked choice voting, but something that happened over the primary this summer was my husband wanted to vote by mail and I wanted to vote in person. And the reason I wanted to vote in person was because things changed before the election.
Right.
And he said, I don't think I'm gonna have time on election day. We'll see, maybe I'll stop by in the morning. So what we got when we got the ballot is we looked all the way through it and then waited. And that actually isn't very practical for most people. So it's now
You were
dawning
able to
on
do
me
it,
that
yeah.
like we tried to game it so that we wouldn't have that situation.
Right.
But in fact, a lot of Vermonters who are using mail-in ballots, which we saw 52%, voter turnout this time, and a lot of it had mail-in. I had not considered before that this could in fact promote early voting via mail
Right.
in a way that you're less likely to worry and then forget, like
Right.
on voting
Or
day,
you just were
or
sick and you couldn't.
yeah.
Or your kids
So
were
I
sick.
hadn't thought about that before. Thank you.
So, right, now it doesn't solve the problem of, oh, you suddenly hear that the sheriff you thought you were voting for has something come up. Or the presidential candidate has something come up.
Yeah, that is
So it doesn't get around that.
We
It
have a
does-
bill for that.
it-
I don't think we can do anything about that.
We're like,
We have a bill for everything.
It does get around the issue of the candidate withdraws.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I have another, this is from one of the Democratic primaries. If that would be helpful to walk through one more, I can.
Sure, go ahead.
Sure.
Just
So
really
this one,
quickly,
candidates
we're
A-
almost to our break.
The candidates A through K, E, F, H, I, J, K, all withdrew. You can see that G didn't have too many votes anyway. And the write-ins was 0.15. So if all those yellow and orange things all went to D, it was still only going to be 14.64 maximum. So they're not a viable candidate anyway. So all of those votes would get distributed to the top three based on the priority that the voter had, okay? And so this was just an example. Oh, that was,
Sorry.
okay, here. Right, so that the way I distributed it ended up being that, A got 56 and B got 27 and C got 17. Basically, if C got anywhere between 15 and 18%, they're gonna get 2 delegates, okay?
Right, got it.
So I'm gonna stop sharing that and then I'm going to leave because I don't actually need to be in here. Okay. So,
Because we also have it right here.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
on our
yes.
website too.
Okay, great. So, so talking about the second ballot benefit, so those are 2 strong benefits that are specific to the presidential primaries. You don't have that many candidates withdrawing from the other races. It's not-
Right.
But it's very common in the presidential races. So ranked choice voting has been used for over a century in Australia, well before computers. You can't have that complaint about, oh, what do we do, and they have some very remote villages, more remote than what we have. And some states here in the US have been using ranked choice voting for military and overseas voters for years, including in presidential primaries. So it's a time-tested, nonpartisan election method. The legislative committee chair of the Vermont Municipal Clerks and the Treasurers Association and our Secretary of State have said that the timeline to implement ranked choice voting for the 2024 presidential primary may be too fast. If you look at the timeline for Burlington's councilor race and look at implementation in Maine and Alaska, you could reasonably believe that this could be done safely and securely if 2 conditions are met. If it were enacted, because clerks and poll workers would recognize that it's a law and work on making it happen, okay? And the other is if enough resources were allocated for making the election administration changes required and for all the education of clerks, poll workers, and the voting public. But in those locations, the act of running around, getting the signatures on the petitions, and then educating voters to get them to vote for the ballot initiative provided a lot of the clerk and voter education before the bill was even
Right,
passed.
of course it
Okay? So that is a huge step up over us. And clerks could feel the public support. They knew it was now the law of the land, so they got on board as soon as it passed. Even clerks who didn't like it knew that the Secretary of State's office and the legislature could not change it. So you couldn't argue about it. So they needed to get going on implementing. They were thrust into being on the same team as the Secretary of State's office. They couldn't dawdle about arguing about whether or how to transfer ballots securely. They had to help the Secretary of State's office figure that out and then put their full support behind implementing it. We don't have that in Vermont right now. We do not have all that voter education. We do not have a public mandate that clearly shows clerks the public wants this and that cannot be changed by the legislature. We don't have a mandate from a law created publicly, forcing fast teamwork on those decisions. And poll workers may be harder to come by if they fear it's too complicated or don't support it. Now, with the Maine and the Alaska things, they were working on it long enough. And while you're out there trying to get the ballot passed, you probably have volunteers saying, "I'll help," because they were, I mean, especially in Maine, they were a decade worth of frustration. So there were a lot of volunteers. The good news is that doing this through the legislature instead of a ballot initiative means that we can take more time making these decisions. But the bad news is that there would never be a consensus. So that could mean they're making a decision. So I'm wondering whether it would be possible to include in the bill a commissioner task force to help develop the rules for administration to take some of the pressure off of the Secretary of State's office. We need clerks to help iron out all the issues that concern them. And we need a mechanism for obtaining and analyzing the information needed for making the election as smooth, safe, and secure as possible with the highest voter confidence possible. S32 could include deadlines, and if those are met, then proceed with the 2024 election. And if they are not, require that ranked choice voting must be implemented for the presidential primaries no later than 2028. Alternatively, a team that gathers public input, includes clerks from different sizes of towns, could work on including the mechanics in the bill so that they are in the law. If the law can still be enacted this year with that delay. That's what I'm concerned about, is how we do get time to bake it into the law. We want the clerks in the Secretary of State's office to be on the same team implementing the law, rather than having an us versus them conflict going on with clerks feeling pitted against the legislature and Secretary of State's office. I urge this committee to come up with a plan for this bill with dates with which you feel comfortable and confident after hearing all the testimony, and vote unanimously to support this bill for passage this year. The League of Women Voters would like to see this bill enacted this year, ideally as a tripartisan bill and with the support of the governor, so that it's the law of the land. Clerks would start preparing to implement it. Funding for education would be appropriated now, and there would be a reason for people to take advantage of resources to educate themselves about ranked choice voting. It's hard to inspire people to vote about something that seems really far away. Even if the bill ends up setting implementation for 2028, education could help get ranked choice voting passed at other levels, which might be implemented for elections before 2028. So I highly urge you to go ahead and get what you can done now. There's no point in delaying another year on doing the right thing. In 2019, the delay until 2020 meant that it fell off the overflowing plate. And then it was too late because the Secretary of State was retiring. Today, Vermonters are ready. We're sick of wasted votes. We're sick of strategic voting. We're sick of the polarization of our culture. We are ready to start helping each other to improve our elections, to produce results that more closely align with the representation that we want. Vermont is right now to accomplish this first step.
Thank you. Senator Clarkson.
So you're the first person to use the word strategic. So strategic, thank you. Because that raises the subject of bullet voting.
Oh, yeah.
So are you saying to me that ranked choice voting would undermine, that you couldn't do the same thing? I mean, bullet voting wouldn't be a thing.
Bullet voting doesn't, bullet
voting works. So that's strategic in my mind. That's what I thought you meant by not using strategic voting.
So in ranked choice voting, the bullet voting doesn't work, because if your candidate is eliminated, then you have no more choice. That's what happened in Alaska. Sarah Palin's telling people, don't put down anybody else after me, just me. And then you see what happened. So it removes, it doesn't totally, I'm sure that there would be ways people could think through, but it would be like illegal things they would do to the conspiring. You'd have to actually have a conspiracy and try to do, and swaying people how big people are going to vote in a more definitive way than just asking to vote.
Oh, that's a big plus, I think.
It is. So even in the presidential primary, there can be some strategic voting, the way we have it today, because if you think, well, there's 14 candidates and only 2 or 3 are going to get something, so I can't vote for the first 20 people I prefer. I have to vote for one of those 2 or 3. In this, you can. Now, there can still be strategic voting at the end, because if you have, like in Australia, you actually have to vote for every single person in the order, like the 25th candidate is number 25 or whatever. Can you imagine, like, you can't possibly know all those candidates, but we don't do that. Nobody in America has done that. But part of it's the ballot, like how much room is there? If there are 20 candidates, can you list 20 candidate columns? You have to do the ones where you write the column in. Our computers don't do that kind of editing. So if you say only 5 and there's 10 candidates, then the person might rank their first, second, third, and fourth choice. And if they really think that none of their first 4 choices will get it, then they will look at the candidates that are more viable. So there will be a little bit of strategic still, but at least they got the first 4 choices to try to be a sincere voter.
I want to ask you a little bit more about your idea of this sort of commission or whatever it might be called.
Right.
Well, first, I would assume, but maybe I shouldn't assume, that the League of Women Voters would be on board with helping with voter education. That's kind of what you do anyway,
Yes,
right?
right,
So, yes, okay. You didn't explicitly say that, but I just wanted to make sure.
We're getting a public commitment.
Yeah, now we have you on record saying. I'm gonna find you, Betty, and make sure that you, so what, the commission, who do you imagine would be on such a thing? Would it just be clerks and?
You would want clerks from each, like several different sizes. You would want clerks from towns that did not have voting machines, and you'd want to have a variety. And you'd tell people up front, we're not going to come to consensus because we're all human beings. We're going to try to come as close as we can, but we need to make a plan. This is going to happen. And you can decide now, or you can argue it for 5 years and decide in 27, but it's going to happen. So let's just get it done and practice with it, So I would say that you'd want some clerks from different towns, and then you would also want somebody from the Secretary of State's office, of course, maybe a couple of people from their office, since they have different roles in the election procedure. And League of Women Voters would be happy to be participating. I'm sure that there are other organizations that would too. And we might want to call in consultants like Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. But we would need to have some footwork, some time of calling these clerks and getting them on board and getting the input that we need.
I've been told that I think 1/3 of the clerks are turning over. 1/3 seems to be the lucky, or
It does seem to be.
the lucky number with elected officials. I think that's right, or maybe there's a 3 involved in the number of clerks. And in one hand, I think that is a challenge, but on the other hand, it's an opportunity to have new clerks who've never done it before and say, oh, well, this is just the new way this is the way we do things. Instead of having, oh, this is the way we used to do things and now we have to change.
Especially if you've been doing it for 20 years.
Exactly. So I think it might be an opportunity to really have fresh eyes and fresh clerks. That sounds weird, but running elections and not having had done it for the old way if this bill were to pass. But okay, well, that's really interesting. Any
There are
other
many
questions?
clerks who I think probably support it too. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think that there's a uniform voice on the clerk front.
Right.
Yes.
Right. There are clerks that like the idea, and there are clerks that like it in theory, but don't want to deal with having to do it.
Oh, right. I think Senator Norris has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I have one question directly for Betty, then the next question. Anyone can obviously feel free to answer that. What is the membership of the Vermont League of Women Voters?
I don't actually know. I should have asked Sue.
Like the numbers?
Yeah, numbers. I don't know why I have a number 150 in my head. I have no idea. But like as far as I think we have maybe like 25 show up to an annual meeting, and you have to meet some kind of a quorum. I'm not sure what that is. So we are not the big workhorse that they had in Maine. In Maine, there were, I don't remember if he said thousands or 8,000, but there were it was over 1,000 volunteers on the ground in Maine collecting petition signatures.
But I'm concerned about Vermont, obviously, because we have 4 or 5 states outside of Vermont that are Oh, I can feel the excitement in the room here with this ranked choice.
Yeah.
It's exhilarating,
And we
isn't it?
don't have a number of volunteers right now, right? It's infectious.
So let me just ask you, other than, VPIRG and the Women's League of, I'm sorry, pull my glasses. on.
League of Voters, the League of
And
Conservation
Vermont
Voters.
Public Interest Research Group, and more importantly, the city of Burlington. Okay. Has anybody, we do surveys on everything, for Christ's sakes. I mean, has anybody asked Vermonters what they think about this? Do we have those survey results that I can go to and find someplace? I don't talk about the special interest groups or the city of Burlington is already on board with this.
Yep.
Vermonters, well, what do they want? Because we all seem to know what's best for Vermonters, shall we say, in this little room here or any other little rooms throughout the state house here. So do we have those surveys?
I'm not aware of those numbers. I can tell you that when I post, an announcement on Frankfurt Forum for an educational session, I'll have a couple people send me emails saying, yeah, I'm really excited. I'm like, oh, I had no idea that person would care, But a lot of people don't, because don't respond and don't show up because it's not an urgent thing. It's not happening right now. So no, I don't really know how many.
So no one's asked Vermonters what they think about ranked choice voting?
Paul, do you want to answer that?
For the record, Paul Burns, VPIRG. Senator, I'm not aware of any public opinion polling that has been done in Vermont on this. Of course, we occasionally do polls on other issues. They cost thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, and we have not done one. And again, I'm not aware of a broad-based survey of Vermonters seeking their opinion on this particular question.
I guess one comment would be that if Vermonters were opposed, they probably wouldn't have voted in Sarah Copeland Houses as Secretary of State, because that's one of the things that she was running on, I thought.
Yeah, yes.
I know that's like one of the things she was running on, but I don't know if that's like, if there were other bigger issues that could also weigh into why they chose her over the other candidate.
There might have been other bigger issues too. I mean, we can only assume that, right?
Did you have a follow-up or you?
No, I just want to know the membership numbers and.
Yeah, there is a website that does describe them. So is that on your slides anywhere?
No, I didn't actually give the website, but,
Hey, Olivia, would you get the League of Women Voters website for Vermont up and send it to the committee, please?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if we actually say on there how many our members are.
It doesn't really say, but it
Yeah.
might give people a better idea of who they are.
Also on the paperwork that digital paperwork that I send in advance, there is a page specifically about the League of Women Voters of Vermont. I don't have the website address on it, but it talks about what we do, so you have a general idea. I was informed by somebody that you would all know, and I shouldn't waste your time because you're very busy. So I'm just stuck at the end.
No, that's fine. No, it's good to have the information.
Yeah, and there are.
Senator Clarkson, do you have a quick
No, I was
question?
just going to say to Bob, the League of Women Voters, this is a very small chapter of the league, and
Very
it's very regionalized. And in most states, it's a much more robust organization. I mean, it's one of the key educating forces in America, I would say. In most states, the League of Women Voters is really one of our biggest nonpartisan.
Right, so in many states, they actually have paid staff, and in many states, they have multiple leagues called local leagues. We had like 4 or 5, and there's like spending too much time finding volunteers to be the president, the secretary, the treasurer, so we just all lumped into one league, and so we all work on the same stuff together. So we're a very small league compared to.
Okay, I'm gonna actually cut this conversation off because we are behind schedule. Thank you very much, Betty, and it's nice to have you here. And we're gonna take a 7-minute break before we go to our next topic.